So today we're going to be covering lighting, and I have this huge lesson. I divided up into two parts. So we're going to cover the first part of it today, and then we will do the second part of it on Friday when I see you again. So we're going to get right to it because even though I chopped this lesson in half, it's still a lot to cover, even in its first half in one shorter period. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is what I call painting with light. Part one, lights and lighting techniques for cinematic film. We're going to be talking a lot about light today and really breaking it down. So think back to when you were juniors. We talked very briefly about using natural light for your documentaries. We didn't do any light at all, any type of any type of lighting at all for your narrative films. And then we got into documentary and we started talking about how to use natural light and how to aim that natural light and getting light in your interview's eyes. And we talked about all that kind of stuff. And then school closed and things changed and all that kind of stuff. So we didn't have a lot of time to really develop that skill and to practice that skill. So I apologize, you were getting somewhat of a crash course today and this week on lighting. So whatever you learned about lighting last year as a junior, I want you to internalize that because we're going to build off of that basis, knowing that I haven't taught you a lot about lighting. I understand that. And that was by design. There are so many other aspects of film that I wanted to worry about with you guys before we got into lighting. Now that we've learned just about everything else, now it's time to talk about lighting, because lighting is really its own animal. Lighting is its own kind of creature. And there's just so much to do with lighting that it really deserved its own special kind of focus. So that's what we're going to do this week, is talking about light. And I've called this painting with light. And the reason why I called it painting with light is I really want you to frame your understanding and your study of light in that way. And as you practice using your light on your own films, on your future projects, on future assignments, I really want you to think about using the light in that way, as if you were painting. I want you to think about painting with light, as if you were painting with paints. Because learning how to use the light and how to cast the light and how to manipulate the light on your subjects, there really is an art to it. And the more practiced you get at this, the easier it becomes. But it's a real skill. And I'll be honest, it's a tough one. It's not easy. Like, it's definitely a challenge. And there are people who really have a talent for this. Every once in a while, I get a student who's just gravitates towards this and seems to really understand how to utilize light. And that, not to say that you can't learn it, everyone can learn it, but it really is a talent. And the people who are really talented at this go make a career out of this. I have a former student of mine whose father is a lighting technician on big films that you may have seen, films like John Wick. And he makes a living doing that in New York, working with light and painting with light. And it's a real skill and a real talent that some people seem to naturally and intuitively possess. Our goal is to practice it and learn it as much as we possibly can. And maybe you do have that talent. And if you do, then you're really going to get an opportunity to practice it and to let your light shine, so to speak. So painting with light, get that into your head, thinking about painting with light. We're going to start, I'm just going to preface kind of everything that we're going to talk about today with just kind of, well, why do you need lighting? What is lighting all about? You know, what is important about lighting? And basically, this may come as a shock to all of you. Basically, you need light to see. That's the lesson. You need light to see. I know. I was just as shocked as you were. But it turns out you actually need light to see. This is true of our eyes, but it's also true of the cameras. You guys know this. Like, if there's not enough light in the camera, the sensor can't pick up anything, and all you get is noise. All you get is that grainy high ISO when we're adding artificial light to the sensor. But even then, it's like you can't see everything. It gets muddy. So even if you're shooting at night, even if you're shooting a dark scene, you still need light. You still need light to see. This was a real surprise to me as a young film college student when I was working as a production assistant on a big picture, and I was downtown. And we were shooting a night scene from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. And that's how long it was going to take, because we were doing all these night scenes. And I was shocked. They brought in this giant light that was as big as a quarter of the film room size, like a huge giant light. And they shined the entire sheet with it. And I remember thinking to myself as a young film student, why are they doing that? That's weird. That doesn't make any sense. Like, we're shooting at 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. because we want to shoot at night. Why then are we bringing in all this light? Like, that's silly. Like, we should have just shot it during the day. It's so bright, it looks like we're shooting it during the day. But the fact is, you need that much light just to be able to see stuff, even if it's a dark scene, even if it's a night scene. So get that into your head as well. Like, if you're shooting a night scene, if you're shooting a dark scene, or some kind of scene in darkness, you're still gonna need some light, because you need some light to be able to see anything, even to be able to adequately see the darkness and to contrast that darkness with little slivers of light here and there. So you need light to see, and you still need to properly expose your image, even if you're shooting at night. And lighting is about properly exposing the image, yes, but there's actually more to it than that, right? It's not just about making sure the image is exposed properly. It's also about making sure that it fits the mood, and it fits the tone, and it fits the story that's being told, okay? Video in general needs a ton of light. This is not photography, okay? If you're shooting photography, you can do long exposures, right? You can open up that shutter speed, and you can take a picture over the course of 2 minutes if you want. That's how you get those cool space photos, right? Like those cool, like, night sky, photos. You've seen those before, right? Those are long exposures. Well, you can't do that with video, because you're taking 24 pictures every second, right? You're kind of limited in that regard, right? You can change the shutter speed and like let more light into the camera a little bit that way, but it's just going to make your image more blurry. So that doesn't really work with video. So video in particular, more so than photography, needs more light, a lot more light, especially because we want to keep that ISO down so that we don't get a lot of that dirty camera noise type of stuff. Because as you know, that looks gross. You don't want that. You've heard me harp on people for years about having your ISO too high. If you got your ISO too high, that's how you get the ugly camera noise. That's how you get all that weird looking digital kind of grain in it. That's not good. You don't want that. And on your cameras are particularly sensitive to that. Like, if you go over, remember, I always tell you, keep that ISO as low as possible. If you go above 800 on your cameras, it gets pretty bad. Even 800 is kind of pushing it. Right? On other cameras, that may not be the case, but on cameras like yours, it's really noticeable. So you want to try to keep that ISO really, really down. And in order to do that, you need light. You need a lot of light. All right. And then ultimately, again, it's really about the story. Like, how you light your film and how you paint with that light is really about making sure that you're supporting the story and the feeling and the emotion that you're trying to convey. Because again, story is king. Story is the most important part. You really want to make sure that you're supporting that story in a way that the lighting adds to the story and helps the audience identify with the characters, or feel the right emotion, or have the right tone, or the right kind of vibe that's going on in any particular scene. And lighting goes a long way into making that happen. You've seen this slide before. This is from my film mode lesson, where we talked about all the different ways that we can get into film mode. Remember, all the different ways that we can emphasize a story visually and display a story and convey a story emotionally through visual means. And we talked about blocking, and we talked about the layout of the scene, and we talked about the use of color. And very briefly, we talked about light and shadow. And you remember there were a number of different ways that we could use that light and shadow to convey meaning into our story, to convey the feeling or the emotion, or even have some symbolism. Right? You remember these slides, right? This is the reason why we can look at an image like this and immediately know that this is a very idealistic film. This is a very heartwarming film. This is a romantic film, because we have this very soft light. We look at Keira Knightley here, and she's all very soft and beautiful, and it's like sunset, and it's warm, and this is a very idealistic shot, right? So some of you may or may not have shots like this in your film, and you want to convey that type of feeling, that emotion. So use a very nice, warm, soft light to do that. This is the same reason, that we have the Princess Bride here with the rays. Remember this? The rays of light coming as if from heaven, kind of circling about them, telling us something important about these characters, that their love is special. These characters are unique. Their love is so special. Their love endures even beyond death. right? That's what this shot is telling us. Just with the use of lighting. If you've seen that movie, you understand how that all comes into play. This is foreshadowing the story of this couple, right? This is the same reason we can look at any mystery show or any cop show, right? And we immediately know that it's a mystery. We immediately know that it's a cop show or a drama because of the use of hard light, the use of shadows. You know, we don't know if we can trust these people. They're shrouded. Some of them are shrouded in darkness. Okay, go watch a cop show sometime or a drama like this and pay attention to like the lighting in the police office or in the police precinct. It's always super poorly lit. There is no police station in the world that is so poorly lit like they are in television, right? Nowhere in the world do people work under those conditions. Like, it'd be so bad for your eyes. And yet every time we see a police station in film, it's always lit like this. It always looks so dark and moody and because it's a mystery, because it's a drama. Comedies are lit very differently, right? Comedies are lit very brightly, right? But these are dramas, these are mysteries, and they're gritty, and they have hard truths and mysteries that we're trying to uncover, right? And so they use this lighting to help convey that emotion. Okay, which brings us to today. So we want to basically understand, in order for us to learn how to paint with light, we need to understand our tools. We need to understand what kind of brushes we're actually working with here. So the first thing that you need to know is that not all light is the same. Okay, you actually already know this. You've taken science classes before, and this will start to make sense here in a little bit, but not all light is the same. Light sits on a color temperature spectrum. Okay, then we know this from our physics classes or our chemistry classes, or maybe from your junior high or elementary school science classes, right? You got Roy G. Biv and the rainbow, right? Remember that, right? There's different color temperatures on a spectrum, and light, all light, sits on that color spectrum in some way. There's some temperature with that light, okay? And we measure this color temperature in kelvins, okay? And if you go into your camera settings, and I don't think your cameras last year had this option, but I think your cameras this year might, and more professional cameras absolutely will. You can actually dial into your cameras and specifically choose a certain number of kelvins for your white balance because you want to convey a certain number of kelvins. And that's actually something that you can do on higher end cameras. And I think you can actually do it on your cameras, I think, on the T6Is. But every time you have a different light source, that is going to influence the temperature of the overall light in your scene. Okay, so a different light source means a different measurement of kelvins. Okay, so basically you have a spectrum that looks kind of like this, right? And maybe you've seen something like this before in one of your science classes, right? And you have different kelvins. So daylight, for example, if you go outside and you see the sun, the daylight sits at about 6,000 kelvins. Okay. And then you get a little warmer or a little cooler depending on which way you go. Okay, so like all the way down at 1,000 kelvins, for example, that's like a very reddish hue. That's almost like a fire burning in your fireplace, maybe. Like that's a much more orangey kind of color. Whereas the sun is more on the other end of the spectrum. Okay, and maybe you've noticed this before. Maybe you've gone outside and you've taken a photo or used your camera, and then maybe you've gone inside and all of a sudden your images or your video looks kind of yellow. Has that happened to anyone before? Maybe. Okay. All right. That's because of the color temperature, the difference between the sun and the difference between the lights that you have operating in your home. So we're going to talk about these different light types and where they sit on this color spectrum, as well as different pros and cons of each of these different kinds of lights. So there's basically 4 major light types that the industry uses. There's the tungsten, there's the HMI, there's fluorescent lighting, and then there's the LED. So we're going to talk about all 4 of these. And at Freestyle, we actually have 3 out of 4 of these for you to use and for you to check out and for you to play with on your own film projects. So we're going to talk about all of these different things. They're all different. One's not better than the other. Okay. They're just different tools. They're different kinds of brushes to paint with. Okay. They all have different pros and cons depending on what you need that particular tool for. So the first one we're going to talk about is the tungsten light. There is a photo of it, and I actually have one with me that I'm going to show you here in a minute. I think, where did I go? Where did I put that? Yeah, there it is. So this is a tungsten light. We have ones that look just like this. And tungsten lights are very similar to like old-fashioned light bulbs. So light bulbs been around for a while now, ever since our friend Edison, right? So this is older technology. Okay, it's been around for a long time. This is the staple. This is old faithful. All right, good old tungsten lighting. Okay, it's been around for a long time, and it operates on the same. It's the same kind of thing as those old-fashioned screw-in light bulbs. Okay, because of that, they have a warm color temperature around 3,200. They're more yellow compared to the sun, for example, when you go outside and see the sky. Okay, 3,200 is on the more yellow end of the spectrum. This is why when you go inside, usually, not often, not all the time, but often, you get a more yellow light inside compared to what you get outside. Because again, daylight is around 6,000, and these tungsten lights, which are usually what we had in our home for a long time, up until very recently, they operate on more of a spectrum around 3,200 Kelvin. Okay, so it's a much more warmer yellow light. Okay, again, they're often used indoors. Now, that's not always the case. Technology has changed in the last 10 years or so, and we have a lot of different kinds of lighting that we're using in our homes. But up until about 10, 15 years ago, almost the only kind of light bulb you could buy for your home was a tungsten light. And so it was these very yellowish kind of hue light bulbs, which we associate with warmth, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. Because when you go outside, you know, it's cold out there. There's snow out there, or so I hear. I don't know, like some places there's snow outside, right? And you go inside to escape that coldness. And in olden times, we'd have a fire going, right, in a fireplace, and that's a warm light. It's kind of a yellow-orange light. And then the tungsten light bulb came along, and that's, again, kind of a burning like a yellow light, right? And we associate that with warmth. So now we have that warm by the fire kind of color temperature that we associated with warmthness. And now, because of a century of filmmaking, you all associate yellow light with being inside. We all do, because that's part of our culture now, because we've grown up with fire in the fireplaces and with candlelight, and then with tungsten light after Edison. And we've just grown accustomed to that. Okay, you don't have to have yellow light inside your home, not these days, but we still associate that in the film industry with being an indoor light. We call it indoor balanced light. Okay, tungsten lights, one of the very best things about tungsten lights is they are super bright, ridiculously bright. You can get ones that are really, really, really bright. I have one that I'm going to turn on here for you in a minute. It's 1,000 watts. It's like super bright. Okay, that is one of the best things about tungsten light bulbs, is you can get very, very bright lights, and that is awesome. The other really positive thing, the other major pro about tungsten lights is, out of all the lights, they have the best color. And what I mean by that is, when you film something on tungsten lights and you take it into like Premiere or DaVinci or After Effects to do your color grading, it color grades so much better than when you're using other kinds of lights. There's something about that tungsten light that just grades very, very well. I've learned this to be true. In my film lessons, I used to always use a tungsten light up until the bulb burned out early at the start of this year. And I have learned very quickly, now that I'm using a different kind of light, through experience, that the tungsten light really does color a lot better than the other kinds of lights in the industry. If you go back and look at film online lessons from last March or April or May, the color just looks better in those than it does in all my ones from this year, where I'm using a different kind of light. It doesn't look bad this year. And if I wanted to, I could manipulate and spend more time working on that color. But boy, it was so easy to grade and so easy to color correct the color on those shots when I shot them with tungsten light. So that's one of the major advantages for tungsten light. And one of the reasons why tungsten light is still used probably the most out of any of the lights in the film industry. Another major positive thing about the tungsten light is that they're, comparatively speaking, pretty low cost. Like, you can go to Home Depot and find yourself a really, really bright light bulb, you know, a 500 watt light bulb or a 1,000 watt light bulb, and plug it into like a little can light and get a can light for $10. And lo and behold, for under like $35, you got yourself a little film light. That's awesome. That's great. Some of the other lights that we're going to talk about today are a lot more expensive than that. Even the nice tungsten lights that we have that are made for film, you know, the bulbs are anywhere between $10 and $50. And then the lighting itself, the housing for the bulb, the lighting itself is only like $150 to $300. And comparatively speaking, that's pretty cheap. That is pretty cheap. So that's one of the reasons why we like tungsten lights. Now, there are some cons about the tungsten lights. The first is that they are very hot, like extremely hot. Like you touch them and you will scald your skin hot. They get crazy hot. When you are operating a tungsten light, you want to make sure you are wearing gloves. You want to make sure you are being careful. You want to make sure all your cables are taped down so nobody trips on them. I've had students who have singed their carpets before with these lights. Okay, like you will see smoke coming off of them occasionally. They get crazy hot. And if you are lighting an actor or actress or somebody in your shot and you shine a bunch of bright tungsten lights on them, they're so bright and they're so hot, their eyes might get squinty. They might start getting really warm. They might start sweating. They might start getting uncomfortable. So that's some of the cons about using a tungsten light. They sure look good when it comes to color, but there are some risks involved. It gets really hot and it might make the performance of your actor not as good. So those are things to consider. The other con about the tungsten light is they use a ton of power. Because they're so bright and they just use so much power to power that brightness. So your electric bill goes through the roof when you're using a lot of tungsten lights. This is why we don't use a lot of tungsten lights in our home anymore, because we save a lot of power. It's better for the environment and it's good for your electric bill. So we don't see a lot of tungsten lights in our homes anymore. But up until, but that's pretty recent. 10 years ago, all you could get was tungsten lights for your home. Let me show you my tungsten light here. So I've got one here with me. Okay, so here is one of our tungsten lights. I got a bunch of these as well as others. This is a 500-watt one, and you got these barn doors that open and close. And then inside here, you can kind of see the light bulb. And there's a nice handle on here so that I can not touch it. Because if I touch any of this when it's on, I will get burned. Like this will burn me, this will burn me, this will burn me. Everything about this will be super hot to the touch, except for this little rubber handle, that's why it's here. So you can mount this on a stand and aim it where you want it to aim. There's a little, it plugs in. There's a little lever here, which allows you to spotlight it if you want to spotlight it, which is kind of cool. And these have great color and get super, super hot. And we've got a lot of these, and there are a ton of these that are available for you to check out. And I actually have one plugged in over here in the room. I'm going to turn it on so you can kind of see what it looks like. This is a 1K, a 1,000-watt bulb that I'm going to turn on. It's super bright. It's so bright, I actually moved it back. So it's about 15 to 20 feet away from me right now. And I'm going to turn it on. Here we go. And there you go. There's my tungsten light, my 1K, and it is pretty bright, and it's not even shining directly on me. Like it's a little bit off to the side, like it's aimed a little bit to my right. If I lean to my right, you can see I'll get a little bit brighter. Now, right away, you're going to notice a few things about this light. For starters, immediately I look very orange. Okay. And that is because this is a warmer light. It's operating at 3,200 Kelvin. Okay. The lights that I had previous to this were at a much higher numbers of Kelvin. They were around 52 or 5,600. And this is 3,200. So immediately we know this is on the warmer end of the color spectrum. My camera is calibrated for the other lights that I was using. I could recalibrate my white balance. I could change my camera so that this looks normal and so that I don't look so orange. Okay, that's something that you can do in your camera. You can just change the type of light that you're using in the camera, or you can actually adjust the kelvins or change or take a custom white balance and take a photo of something white and do it that way. So right away, you notice that this is a different color spectrum. But you also might notice a few other things. The shadows are a lot more pronounced. You can see the shadow next to my nose. It's a much harder shadow. Okay. The shadows look different. There's a harsher shadow. You know, if I hold up my hand, you can see the harsh shadows that my hand makes on my face. Okay. So this might be great if I'm making a drama film, a mystery film, a cop film, but probably not great if I'm making a romantic film and I want to look really attractive, right? Like that's not what do I want to do. I probably want something softer for that romance type of moment, right? One of the other things I noticed is that the color, it's orange. I know it's orange, but the color saturation is actually really nice. The color just looks better in terms of the quality of color. Again, the white balance is not set, so I'm a little orange right now. But if but even with that, everything is rich, everything is saturated, and it looks really nice. And the colors are even across where they're supposed to be even. So when I color grade this, it's actually going to look a lot better than when I color grade the other kind of light. Not to say that the other lights are bad, they're not. They have other pros and other advantages to them, and you can still color grade those very nicely. But if I want to do like a nice romantic shot, I want to try to make this light softer, but man, I do like this color. I do like this color. Now watch what happens when I flip back to my other light. You ready? I'm going to look green because your eyes have adjusted. Your eyes have adjusted. Are you ready? Here we go. I look green, don't I? See, now I look sick. Now I look sick and like I'm gonna die. I got like the coronavirus or something, right? Like I look like all green and pale and everything like that. And that's nothing's changed. This is the same way I look every class period. Okay, but your eyes have adjusted. So you have to be careful with that because your eyes get used to stuff. Your eyes get used to light. This is why you don't notice it when you go outside and when you come inside and everything's yellow. Your eyes don't notice it because you get used to it. Your eyes adjust. And then you take a photo and you're like, why is everything so yellow? Well, it's because that's the way it actually looks, but your eyes adjusted and you didn't notice it. So this is when you're doing color grading in post, this is why we don't want windows in the film room, for example, right? Because you don't want other light sources interfering with what you see on the screen. And this is why you use the scopes when you're doing your color grading, because you can't always trust your eyes because your eyes adjust. Your brain adjusts for that and compensates for that based on the look of what your eyes and your brain knows it's supposed to see. Right. So you have to be mindful of that. So we have a lot of tungstens that are available to check out. I like them a lot. They don't get checked out as much as the other lights because students like a lot of the pros of the other lights. But if you like color and you want to make sure your film is colored really nicely, I've learned over the years more and more that tungsten's really the only way to go if you really want to make your color look good. But you'll have to figure out ways to make that light softer if you want to make that light softer. Because they're not naturally soft lights, as we will learn as the lesson continues. Okay, which brings us to our next kind of light. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this one because this is the one that we don't have at Freestyle and probably the one that you're never really going to work with unless you're working on a big budget movie, and that is the HMI. And the HMI, in case you're wondering, I'm not going to pronounce it correctly, but it stands for hydrargyrium medium arc iodide. And basically what that is it runs on mercury vapor, gas and mercury vapor. How cool is that? The light operates on vapor. Pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And the reason why HMIs are really cool is they mimic daylight. You use these lights when you want to light up a street. So that big giant light that I told you about when I was working on that big budget film that lit up the whole street, that was an HMI. These are huge lights that light up the entire streets or entire locations to make it look like daylight. Okay, right around 6,000 kelvins. And that's exactly what they're used for sunlight. These are really bright lights. I mean, they're huge. They're super, super bright lights. And because of that, they need tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of power. And they're ridiculously expensive. So you can see the photo that I've included there. Those are HMI lights. And you can see relative to the size of the man in the lower right-hand corner of that image, you can see that these are really big lights. And those aren't even the biggest ones. Okay, those are small HMIs. Okay, like these lights get really, really, really huge. And they use a ton of power when you are lighting with these lights. Obviously, we don't have these at Freestyle because A, they would be way too big for us to store anywhere. B, no one has the power to run them. C, they're ridiculously expensive. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. I don't even know that's how expensive they are. All right. But finally, like, how often are you going to need to light up a whole giant street corner, right? Like, I mean, there are other ways to get the shot that you are going to need to get for your film. Even the film studios, they don't own these lights. Okay, they rent these lights. It would be impractical and not very cost effective for them to purchase and buy and own these lights. They just rent them as they are needed for any particular day. And then you give them back to whomever does rent them out, because it would not be practical for a studio to actually own these. Way too expensive, and you don't use them enough to get your money's worth. So you just rent them when you need them. So that's the HMI. Oh, and by the way, yeah, they're kind of dangerous. So you got to be careful with these lights. Not only are they, you know, operating with chemicals inside them and things like that, not only is there a danger of, you know, electricity and stuff like that, but they're just really big. And so, like, you could get crushed by one of these if you're not careful. So they're just kind of dangerous in general, which is another great reason why we don't have them in freestyle. All right, which brings us to the fluorescent. The fluorescent light is actually what I'm using right now. Okay, so if you're curious about what kind of light I'm using right now, I'm using a fluorescent light. It looks exactly like the one in my photo there, and I'll show you an example of one here in a minute. These also run on mercury vapor, so that's kind of cool. Fluorescent lights, they run on vapor. Maybe you knew that, I don't know. These are almost daylight, but a little bit warmer than daylight. So these are on the cooler end of the spectrum at 5400 Kelvin, okay? But they are slightly warmer than daylight, but not by much, pretty indistinguishable. I mean, depending on how many clouds are in the sky, you might get 5400 outside with just the sun. It just kind of depends on, you know, what time of day it is and things like that. So these are basically what we call daylight balanced, outdoor balanced lights, okay? The nice thing about the fluorescent lights, and the reason why we like them, and the reason why I'm using them right now, is because they have a nice, soft, even lighting. And the reason for that is because these lights are, they're larger than a tungsten light, for example. So here is my tungsten light. And as I showed you, the bulb for the tungsten light is just a single point, right? It's just a single bulb in the middle of the light. The fluorescent lights, though, the fluorescent lights are big and wide. See? So this light is coming from over here, but it's also coming from over here and everywhere in between. So this light is going to wrap around my face a little bit more, because there's light on this side, but there's also light on this side. It's not a single bulb. It's not a single point like the tungsten light was. And that's how you get those harsh shadows that the tungsten light creates. This, on the other hand, creates a larger surface. And when you have a larger surface, it allows the light to wrap around your subject more, which creates softer light, softer shadows. You don't see the harsh shadows around my nose and face like you did with the tungsten light. If I turn on the tungsten light again, you can see the difference, right? There's the tungsten light. You see the harsh shadows, right? And if I turn on the fluorescent lights again, you don't get those harsh shadows. They're blurry shadows. This creates a softer image. It's a more flattering image. Okay, it hides imperfections in the skin. It hides blemishes because it disguises it in a nice, soft, even light. So if you have, for example, a scene where you have someone who's a rock star or somebody who's famous, or a glamour shot, or a love interest, or a romantic scene, somebody that you want to look really good or really attractive in your shot. And hey, we all want to look attractive in our shots, right? Right? You use a nice soft light like this because it'll hide blemishes, it'll hide imperfections, and it'll make a nice softer image that is more flattering to your subject. So that's one of the reasons why we really like these fluorescent lights, because they are really good at that. These are the softest lights I own by themselves. There are ways to diffuse light, all lights, and soften up the shadows. So it's not like the end all be all. It's not like you have to use a fluorescent if you want soft light. That's not true. You can use any light you want and still get those soft shadows. There are ways to do that. But if you have no way of doing that and all you have is the light, then these long fluorescent lights can help create a nice, soft, even bit of lighting. They're pretty compact. As I just held one up, they're pretty light. There's not a lot to them, really. which is kind of nice. They don't use a lot of electricity. They don't use a lot of power. This is why, like here at school, all the lights in the ceiling are fluorescent lights. All the lights in your classrooms are fluorescent lights. If you go to an office building, all the lights are fluorescent lights. They don't use a lot of power, and they save on the electric bill, and everyone likes to save money. So people use a lot of these in corporate buildings and offices and schools and things like that. You might have some fluorescent lights in your home. I know my parents have fluorescent lights in their garage, for example. But these days you can buy fluorescent lights, all those little squiggly light bulbs. You know, those squiggly light bulbs that are all like, they look kind of like spaghetti, right? Those are fluorescent lights. And we like those because they don't use a lot of power and they save you money on your electric bill. Like a lot of money on your electric bill. Like it can make a huge difference, especially the more number of lights you have in your home. They also last a really long time. So they cost a little more. Fluorescent lights cost a little more than a tungsten bulb, but they last like a really long time. I probably have 20 or 30 fluorescent lights in my classroom, and every school year, at the beginning of the school year, I replace maybe 4. So they last a long time. They last a long time. A tungsten light will go out all the time. But these fluorescent lights have a much, much longer life. They're not nearly as hot as the tungsten lights. They're still warm. Like if I touch it and leave my hand on there, I will burn myself, but not only if it's been on for a while, and only if I leave my hand on there for a while. Okay, so they will get a little warm, but they don't radiate heat like the tungsten lights do. I sit in front of this one every day and it doesn't make me hot or sweat or anything like that. So it's a lot easier on your actor or actress if you're working with lights like this that don't get quite so hot. And relatively speaking, they're pretty low cost. I've had students break my fluorescent bulbs and they just go over to Home Depot and buy some new ones. It's not a big deal, you know, like $15, $19, whatever. And you can replace a bulb and it's not the end of the world if you break one. So they're not like crazy expensive or anything like that, which is kind of nice. So we have a number of these that are available for checkout. I think I have maybe 10 or so of these that are available for checkout. They're not as bright as a tungsten. So right now, for example, I'm using 2 at the same time to cast this light on me because they're not nearly as bright as one of the tungsten lights. So you sometimes need more of them. If you're going to use all fluorescent lights, you might need more of them to get the same level of brightness that you need without raising your ISO on your camera. All right, the next one we're going to talk about, the last one we're going to talk about is the LED. This is the new kid on the block. This one is basically newer technology used for film, and now it's starting to be used even in your homes. Anyone here have LED lights at home? Anyone? I've got some in my home. Oh, yeah, there's some. Leah's got some. I've got some I got a whole bunch in my house. They're fun because you have a lot of control over LEDs. You can dim them. You can change the color temperature of them. And if you buy the fancy ones, you can even change the color of them, right? I've got a few in my house where I can just change the color of them however I want, which is kind of cool. So there's a lot of freedom that you can play around with these LED lights, which is one of the reasons why they're becoming really popular in the film industry. They look kind of like this. This is the photo of one of the ones that we have. LED stands for light emitting diode, in case you were wondering. And again, the nice thing about this is you can change the color temperature for most of these lights. When you get an LED set of lights, oftentimes you can change the color. So for example, here is one of our LED light panels, and you can see there's a whole bunch of little diodes in there that all light up. And on the back of this, there is a dimmer dial. So this is really cool. I can brighten or lower the brightness by dimming this dial. That's really cool. You can't really do that with other lights, but with these LED lights, you can control the brightness. That's cool. And then some of my light panels, including this one, have a color temperature wheel. So I can actually make this a warm light, an indoor balanced light, or I can make it a cool light, an outdoor daylight balanced light if I want, or I can put it somewhere in between if I want. So that's really great. And it says right here, I can go all the way from 3200 Kelvin to 5600 Kelvin, which is basically tungsten all the way to daylight, basically. That's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. Pretty cool. So here, I will, while I'm on this screen, I will show you what that looks like. So turn off my fluorescence and I'll turn on. Turn on, there you go. And there is my LED. Okay, so right away you can see it's a little bit warmer right now than my fluorescent, but I could adjust that. I could change that if I wanted to. Okay, now you'll notice it's not as soft as my fluorescent. Okay, I still have some shadows on my face. It's not as soft as my fluorescent, but it's not as hard as my tungsten either. It's in between because it's a larger surface than the tungsten, but it's not as wide, it's not as large a surface as my fluorescent. Okay, so that's how you get softness. So there's a lot that I can do with these tungsten kind of lights. So that looks pretty good. All right, I'm gonna go back to my other light here. Okay, so there's a nice color temperature, and this is one of the range in color temperature, which is one of the reasons why we really like these lights. They usually create a nice, soft, even lighting, and the more of these you add, the softer light you can get, which is nice. These use very low power, extremely low power, which is one of the reasons why we really like them. Not just in our home to save on our electric bill, but also in the film industry because you can run these on batteries. You can run them on batteries. How sweet is that? If you need to go light your beach scene, you can do that now. That's why I went and bought 20 of these, because I want to be able to give you guys the freedom to light your scenes wherever you want. If you're going to go shoot in the woods, you can light that. If you want to go shoot in the middle of the street at night, you can light that. If you want to go shoot out on the beach or on an island, you can light that. There's a little battery pack spot on the back of these back of these lights. You can plug them in if you want to, but there's a little battery thing here. And I have V-mount adapters because V-mount batteries are way too expensive for us. So I got V-mount adapters and we run them off of just a generic type of rechargeable battery. And they'll run for a long time. I was surprised at how long these would run. So that's really, really nice. So that's one of the reasons why we really like these LEDs. They're pretty light. They're very durable. You're not going to break one of these. They have a really long life. The LEDs don't really burn out. By the time an LED burns out, it will die before, like the whole thing will stop working before the LED burns out, and then you'll just replace the whole thing. So really, really nice in terms of saving money on power. And you being able to have the mobility of moving that LED around, and you're not going to have to go buy light bulbs every time one burns out. They're very, very cool. They don't emit any heat at all. I can put my hand right on top of it as it's on, and I won't feel any difference as if it was on or as if it was off. They just don't generate any heat, which is really nice for your actors and actresses, and really nice for people who are handling those lights. The downside of these is they're not as bright as a tungsten, for example. They're not as bright as you might need more of these to equal the same amount of brightness as some of these other kinds of lights, and they're really expensive. LED light panels are still pretty expensive. They're the most expensive lights I own, and we bought a bunch of them. We bought a bunch of them for you to play with. All right, so the important thing that you need to know now that we have the understanding of all of these different tools is, again, one's not better than the other. You just have to understand that there are different lights for different jobs, and it's really that simple. Sometimes you want this kind of light, sometimes you want that kind of light. It just depends on the look that you want and the type of scene and the type of story that you're trying to light. And that's really all there is to it. And understanding you're going to have an opportunity to come check out some of these lights. You need to be thinking about this ahead of time. You want to make a little lighting plan for yourself and ask yourself, what kind of light do I want for this scene? And what kind of light will I need for this scene? And what makes the most sense? What's the most practical? What can I work with? Or which light has the most versatility? Maybe you have a scene or scenes in your movie where you're doing a lot of different kinds of stuff. Which kind of these lights can kind of do all of those things for you? Is there one that can do all of those things for you? They all generate light, but they all have different pros and they all have different cons. So we're going to talk about some of the lighting techniques, how to make these lights do what we want them to do. And we're not going to be able to get through all of today's lesson, which is why we're going to have part 2 of this on Friday. So we're going to pick a lot of this stuff up on Friday, but I want to touch on some of the basic things about these lights. Basically, we're going to talk about how to do that soft and hard light. How does that work? Because that's probably the most important thing for you in the beginning stages of lighting, is like, how do you control the hardness or the softness of the light? Because that has, I think, the biggest impact, aside from the color, has the biggest impact on the tone and feeling of any given shot that you're trying to show with your light. We're going to talk about the direction of light, but we probably won't get to that today. We'll probably pick that up on Friday. And then on Friday, we'll also continue with 3-point lighting, how to build upon that, as well as, how to use these different techniques to create a certain type of tone in your film. So for soft light, hard light, we've already kind of talked about it. I've already kind of shown you some examples, but it's basically just where's the light versus where are the shadows. And the bigger the light, the softer the light is. Okay. And the closer it is to your subject, the softer the light is. The farther the light is away and the smaller the light is, the harder the light becomes, because the light source is far away and it's only coming from one direction. If the light is close to you, remember, it wraps around somebody's face because the light's so big, it's hitting this part of my face and this part of my face. But if it's far away, it's only going to hit one part of my face. And that creates that harsh lighting. So if I'm looking around the room right now, if I'm looking at all of your screens and all of your faces, let's see. Carson probably has the softest light going on right now out of everyone here. I'll stop my screen share so you can see. So Carson's probably got the softest light. Elisa's got soft light too, but her lighting is kind of flat and just everywhere. So it's not really generating, it's not really a soft light. It's just, there's just light coming from all directions. But Carson has a light that's clearly coming from what looks to be his left, our right. And that is a soft light that's kind of wrapping around his face a little bit. It's a good light. Like, Carson looks great right now. If I look at Aksher, for example, or Max, boy, both of those guys have a really hard light coming from the other direction. And you can see the harsher shadows that creates. Those two individuals are shrouded in mystery. We don't know if we can trust them. They might be untrustworthy. We don't really know, right? And that creates a certain feeling and emotion, right? So how do you utilize soft light versus hard light can have a really huge impact on how things look on camera. And yeah, even in like a Zoom conference like this, how you are perceived, how your peers perceive you, because these things are part of film language, and they say something about how we interpret your character, believe it or not, like, because it's ingrained in us, it's ingrained in our culture. So that's actually something that you want to be thinking about. If, for example, you ever have to do like a job interview online or something like that, you better make sure you have a nice, real, good looking soft light, because you want to look happy and positive and trustworthy, right? As opposed to like the harsh lighting of like a film noir mystery kind of a thing. So again, soft light and hard light is controlled by the size and the distance of light. So I'm going to show you this video here. This is from our friends at Rocket Jump Film School. And the two lessons that I'm going to show you from them on lighting, I think, are their best videos. I know some of their other ones are okay, and some of their other ones are pretty good and funny. This gal goes through this stuff on lighting and demonstrates it so well. She's just a really excellent teacher, and really like shows exactly how the light is manipulated in a way that's really clear and easy to understand. So I think this is Rocket Jump's best set of episodes, although they have a lot of other fun episodes too, if you ever want to check out their channel. So I'm going to hit the video box and we'll watch this one here. And this is just going to talk about this idea of soft light versus hard light and how that is achieved.
Hey guys, and welcome to the first installment of our Lighting 101 series. Today we're going to talk about the quality of light, what it is, how to control it, and why it matters. Watch your eyes. Now, when we say quality of light, we aren't talking about how good the light is. In the most basic sense, we're talking about how the light behaves, how it interacts with your subject, and the effect it creates. It really comes down to two things, whether the light is hard or soft. Okay. So now, let's compare hard and soft light. We have Ellery here lit with a very hard light, and the first thing you're going to notice is a lot of people would describe this as harsh, because hard light casts very defined and sharp shadows, and you can see this by the shadows cast on her face and the back wall. So now we have Ellery in very soft lighting. Unlike hard light, which has a very directional path, soft light tends to wrap around its subject, therefore the shadows cast by soft light are much more gradual with softer edges. So let's look at both of them up close. See how the hard light casts a shadow with a very distinct edge. You can see this cast by Ellery's nose and on the back wall. By contrast, the soft light casts a very gradual shadow on her face, and the shadow on the back wall is barely there. So what makes a light hard or soft? Can I just go out and buy a soft or hard light? Well, that's not really how it works. The hardness or softness of a light is determined by the size and distance relative to its subject. So basically, the smaller your light is compared to your subject, the harder the light will be, and vice versa. The bigger your source is compared to your subject, the softer the light will be. Okay, but wait. What about the sun?
Cue the sun.
The sun is huge, but it acts like a really hard light source that casts tons of shadows. Well, yes, the sun is enormous, but it's also 93 million miles away, which means it usually appears to be about the size of a fingernail in the sky, relative to our perspective here on Earth. If it were closer, appearing much bigger in the sky, the sun could be an extremely bright, beautifully soft source, but we'd also be really, really extremely dead. So distance is an important factor when considering the relative size of your source. Generally, the closer the source is, the softer the shadows are going to be. Just look at how shadow puppets work. If you hold your hands too close to the light, the shadows are soft and blurry. But if you put enough distance between your hands and the light, the shadows are sharp and clear. So to recap, the difference between a hard and soft light is how it renders shadows, and the hardness and softness of a light is controlled by the size and distance relative to the subject. So what's the deal with diffusion? So diffuse light is often confused for soft light, and honestly at this point they're often considered the same thing since usually they're used together. But while soft light is primarily defined by the relative size to the subject, diffuse light is when light passes through a physical material, whether it's gel diffusion, particles in the air like dust, haze, or smoke, or pass through silks or fabrics like muslin. All of these diffuse the light, meaning they scatter the light, spreading it across the entire material and emitting what looks like a more even light. An easy way to understand this is to look at a flashlight. Let's hit the lights. So let's shine this flashlight against a flat wall. Notice there's a very bright spot in the middle. That's called a specular highlight, and that's caused by the bright bulb in the middle of the flashlight. So now, if we add some diffusion, the specular highlight basically disappears, and it spreads out the light evenly over its radius. So let's go back to Ellery and put diffusion on the hard light. What the diffusion is doing is evening out the light that's hitting your subject, reducing glare and smoothing out the specular highlights. The light appears more even across your subject, but the edges of your shadows will mostly remain the same. But ultimately, the 1-2 punch that diffusion can offer is this. It can diffuse the light and increase the physical size of your source at the same time. So let's look at this light panel. This is a 1x1 Astra. It's about a square foot in size. Let's add a softbox to it. So now we have a more diffused light and a larger source. This is 24 inches across. If we want something bigger, let's look at this Solus 6 Fresnel. It's about the size of my hand. But if I turn it around and bounce it off of this bounce card, now we have a light source the entire size of this card. And last but not least, if you have an 8x8 silk, you can turn this light into an 8-foot wide source, or 64 square feet. So now that we know what hard light and soft light do and how to control them, what are we communicating by using them? The quality of light alone can tell us an incredible amount of things. It can orient us.
And then there was light.
Give us clues to where we are, what time of day it is.
A beautiful sunset.
Are we seeing the soft, gentle light of dawn or the harsh, direct light of midday? Are we in a hot, sweaty city in the summer?
You're sweating.
Or in the middle of a cold, dull winter in the country? It can create an atmosphere, the mood of a place or time, how we should feel in a space or a moment. Are we seeing harsh streetlights casting dangerous-looking shadows around us in a shady part of town? Or are we walking along familiar city sidewalks with warm, inviting light spilling out from neighbors' windows? Is the smoky, hazy spotlight of a jazz club dazzling the room and making our leading lady glow? Or is the stark, direct spotlight onto a large theater stage making our actor feel trapped and the room dark and tense? And going even further, it can portray our characters in literally a flattering or unflattering light, revealing to the audience who they are. Are they mysterious and alluring?
I've been dead once already.
Or are they repulsive and hardened to the world? Are they deeply in love, or are they in deep turmoil? Do they look youthful and bright, or is the wisdom of their years etched deeply into the wrinkles of their face? You can say a lot with quality of light, and the best part is the same principles in film lighting on professional sets apply to your lights at home. So now that you know how to control the quality of light, you can find creative ways to achieve it. If you want to create soft light, find ways to make your source bigger. Use homemade diffusion like a shower curtain or a bed sheet to create a large, soft source in front of your subject. And if you want to create hard light, use smaller sources or move big, powerful sources farther away to get those harsher shadows. So don't be afraid to test things out and try out new things. It doesn't matter if your rig looks like a weird duct taped together monstrosity or an arts and crafts project. If it creates a light that helps you tell your story, then it's the perfect light. So keep an eye out for future Lighting 101 tutorials, but in the meantime, try these techniques out yourself and show them to us. Head over to our forums, right here, and show us what you came up with. Have fun.
All right, good stuff, good stuff. She's a good little teacher. Right, like helps to like kind of see how they operate with that light and all that kind of stuff. I think that's very, very beneficial to be able to actually see it in like in action. Like if we were in school right now, these are things that I would be demonstrating with you in class as we moved lights around. I would have one of you sit in the middle of the room and we would use all these different lights and shine them onto you and all that kind of stuff, and you'd get a sense for how these lights operate and what distance they need to be and things like that. So it's helpful to have a video like this that helps kind of explain how it all works. Okay, we are getting close to wrapping up this portion of the lesson, but I want to try to speed through a few more things so that we don't have to cover too much on Friday. So one of the things, and here's a real basic one for you that you guys already kind of understand this, I would wager. But here, for example, is high key versus low key lighting. And this is different from soft light versus hard light. This is more about like the overall exposure and lighting of a shot. So high key lighting is very high key, everything's lit. So like Elisa, for example, on her screen, as I said earlier, was kind of lit everywhere. That's a very high key type of shot. That type of shot works very well if you're making a comedy or if you're making a sitcom where they use multiple cameras filming at once, because they can't light for each individual camera. So they just light everything and then they shoot all of it at the same time. And then that's how they turn out sitcoms so very quickly, right? Because they shoot 3 angles at once. They do all their singles and master shot all at the same time, right? And then they edit it together that way. And that's a lot faster than in film when you're more serious and you're crafting each individual shot. So you're working for the lighting for each individual shot. A low key shot is the opposite, right? It's much more darkened overall. So some of the examples like Aksher and Max's camera shots that we looked at earlier, for example, were much more low key. They had more shadows. Neither is right and neither is wrong. It just depends on the mood that you're trying to achieve for your scene and what kind of mood you're trying to get your audience to feel. Okay, which brings us to modifying light. And I'm going to talk about a few of these and then we'll have to stop and then we'll pick up this same idea and concept on Friday, which will be great. So modifying light, there's a few ways that we can do this. We can use diffusion like we saw in the video. We can use soft boxes, right? We can use barn doors. I showed you the barn doors on my tungsten light. You can use those to manipulate the light and block off certain areas with shadows. You can use something called black wrap. Black wrap is basically a fancy word for like thick black tinfoil that you can wrap around your lights and then kind of squish the way you want it to block off certain sections so that it's just shadow there and not light. You can use flags, which is the same principle, but it's just a stand with a piece of cardboard or something blocking off a certain section of light. And there's a number of ways you do that. So for example, on my screen right now, I have a light that's bouncing off my ceiling right now. That's kind of acting as my hair light. And as I was setting it up, I was looking at my pink hoverboard on the right-hand side of on this side of my screen. I don't know if it's the right or the left for you, but on this side of my screen, I was looking at my pink hoverboard and I was like, oh, there's a hot spot there. I don't like that. It's too bright. I'll use the barn doors on my fluorescent light to block off that section. So now I still get the color out of that background that I wanted. And a lot of lights come with barn doors. Not every light does, but a lot of them do. And those are things that you can use to help block it off. But if you don't have barn doors, you can use the same principle with a flag or with black wrap, anything to block the light from getting in, from hitting where you want it to hit, so that it remains cast in shadow. And then finally, the last way that you can block off and modify light is by using a cookie. And I'm not going to tell you what a cookie is today. I'm going to tell you that's something for you to look forward to on Friday. You're going to learn what a cookie is on Friday. All right. So we're going to watch one video here, and then we're going to wrap up. And this is kind of another one of the Film Riot videos that's going to explain to us how to sort of soften light, some interesting ways that we can soften light. Another way that perhaps you can use tools that you have at home to create that softer light that maybe you want for certain key shots.
First thing that we're gonna do is look at direct light versus diffused as a motherfucker light, since everything that you do to the way that your light hits the subject will give it totally different character. So for instance, here's a shot with direct light on Josh, no diffusion. We have a very moody shot, lots of contrast with an extreme line going down his face. Then we switch to the same shot with diffused light. Here we still have a nice amount of contrast since there is no fill, but now we have the light wrapping around his face more, giving us more detail and feathering that harsh line. Each look is great and can be used to great effect. It's just a matter of knowing what each can do for your shot and what emotion it brings. Then you can make the choice intelligently. But again, here we have direct light, very harsh, strong on the right side of his face, getting just the eye on the left side, and you can see that it is very unflattering, bringing out all the imperfections and highlighting if the subject has any sweat or oil on their face. Then to the soft, which the background here is a bit lighter since I upped the exposure to keep the level of the face consistent between the two shots. But here you see again that the light is wrapping more around his face, more detail on the left side there, and you have a lot softer and more flattering quality of light. But again, you might not want that. You may want a very harsh feel. So it's all about the story and what look is going to best service that story. But how do you get that beautifully diffused light? Well, you can either bounce your light off of a bounce board or put diffusion between your light and your actor like this sheet, which is a really cheap way to get it done. And that will get you this look here. Not as soft as the first one I showed you right here. Close, but you can see that in this one, the skin is a lot softer, and in this one here, it's a bit more harsh on the skin. I'm getting this extra soft look by using a technique that I learned from Shane Hurlbut called the book light. Shane actually goes in depth on his blog right here. You should definitely check that out, and if you're not subscribed to Shane's blog, do that now. He is a wellspring of amazing info and inspiration. But I am getting this look here by bouncing my 1K off this white bounce, then diffusing that light further by hanging a white sheet in front of the bounce. So instead of diffusing direct light, I'm diffusing bounce light, which is already soft. The result is a really pleasing and beautiful light, and to my eye, helps the DSLR get a much more filmic quality than it has with that direct diffused. So again, a book light is just bouncing your light off of a surface at an angle, then diffusing that light again before it hits your actor. And I really love the look. But again, go here to learn that technique even more in depth. But now I'm looking at this and it seems that the shadow on the side of his face is being filled a bit, even though I have no bounce or light over there. Well, that is because of the wall here. you always have to keep in mind when you are lighting that you are not just controlling the light to the actor, but also what the room is doing. So this light here is traveling to the wall and then back to my actor's face, and maybe I don't want that spill happening, so I will add what is called negative fill. And I will do this super cheap by bringing in a dark blanket right to the side of his face. And now you see here that the extra light is cut off, and we are getting that little bit of extra contrast that I wanted. And again, let's look at it without the negative fill and then with. It makes a really big difference. But now we're gonna take a break and then do some light shaping.
So I liked that example just because it shows how you can use things like bed sheets and blankets around your home to create and modify the light that you already have existing in your space. And this is kind of what I want you to get good at, is learning how the light operates in your home. Like, go ahead and look at, you can all see yourself on screen right now, right? Like, go ahead and look at yourself in your screen and think about, like, where is the light coming from? Like, do I have a soft light on me? Do I have a hard light on me? Like, where is the light source? Is it bouncing off of walls? Right? Because light doesn't just hit our source like we saw in the video, like it's going to bounce around in the room and reflect as well. So where is the light coming from? Is there light coming from off the computer screen and hitting your face? Is there light coming through a window? And this is kind of your assignment for the next couple of days. I want you to pay attention to how the light works around you. How does it interact with your face? And a good way to practice this is just to get out your phone and look at yourself in selfie mode, right? And just walk around your house and walk next to your windows and walk outside and see how the light changes how you look, because it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. If we were in class, I would actually have you do this. I would have you get out your phone and I would have you take some photos with harsh lighting or with soft lighting or lighting, in different places on different, in different ways, like how can you manipulate the light using what you've got? And a lot of you have ways that you can bounce light. A lot of you have white walls in your home. I'm looking at like 4 or 5 of you right now that have a white wall right behind you, and light is already bouncing off of that. If you go stand closer to that wall, that soft light is going to act like a light hitting your face as it bounces off the wall. You can reflect things off of reflectors, but you don't need a reflector. As we've learned in the past, you can use a car windshade, or you can use tinfoil, or you can use a white piece of paper or a pizza box. All right. And if you want to break up or diffuse light, a white bed sheet is a great way to go. We do that in the film industry all the time. You don't have to have something fancy. You can use a white bed sheet. That'll absolutely work and get the job done. All right. So very, very quickly, this will be our last quick little slide, and then I'll let you guys go. This idea of diffusion is really, really key. Like learning how to manipulate and move around that light to get the light to interact with your subjects the way you want it to. So you can, for example, use soft boxes, as we kind of mentioned, use a bed sheet, as we saw in the video, to break up that light, right? You can use diffusion paper. It's basically like tissue paper. I do have some of that, but you could also easily get it yourself. It's not expensive or anything like that. Like, it's something that you can get if you want it. You can use umbrellas. So I have here umbrellas that can be used to diffuse or reflect light. So, and these will actually affix to the tungsten lights. You can actually attach them if you are so inclined. So here, for example, is a white umbrella that's a little bit stuck. There we go. I can shine light through this and that'll diffuse the light, or I can shine light at this and turn the light around so the light is bouncing off of this white surface and bouncing back at my subject. And then I'm using reflected light, and that's a good way to kind of soften up of the light, diffuse a light somewhat. I also have a black umbrella, and on the inside it's got different modes. I've got a silver one here. I have a few gold ones as well. So you can reflect light off of the inside of one of these umbrellas. But you can also use the reflectors that I showed you last year, and I still have a bunch of those that could be checked out. So you can reflect surfaces or use those as a diffuser. Normally, when I teach class, I have one of those set up in front of my light to diffuse my light. The light shines through the diffuser because I want to have a nice, soft, even lighting on my face, because I'm vain and I want to look good. and I want to make sure I look good. But if you want to make your actors or actresses look good, you can do that with the same principles by diffusing your light with a diffuser, or by bouncing light, or by hanging a bed sheet. There's a lot of different ways that you can get this kind of look and soften up your images so that you can get a soft light if that's what you want, or you can keep that hard light if that's the kind of look that you're going for. You really have a lot of control over it once you understand how it all operates. You can use reflectors, as I mentioned, and you can use a scrim gym. We actually have one scrim gym. It looks like this. It's basically just a fancy bed sheet suspended in a frame. We've got one of these that I found in our cabinet when I first became the teacher here. I think it's been checked out once in the entire time that I've been here. It's large. It's very, very large. And you can suspend it on little stands and then swing it around and aim it the way you want it to. But you don't have to spend a lot of money on a big fancy scrim gym. You can just as easily hang a bed sheet and just try to keep the wrinkles out of it. And then that'll work just as well, honestly, if you suspend it in the right way. All right, so that is the end of our first lesson on lighting here during lighting week. I hope that was informative. I hope that was helpful. I hope that provides you a nice foundation with which we can build upon when we have our lesson on Friday, in which we'll get into part 2, and we'll talk about, okay, now that we know how to use all these tools, now that we know how these tools change the hard light or the soft light or the color temperature, we're going to get into how, like, what's the best way to use the light? How do you aim the light? What direction does it matter? Does it matter what direction I aim the light in? How many lights do I need? And how should I choose which lights to put where, that kind of thing. And then finally, how can we use all that knowledge to actually build a scene like a cinematographer would? How do we do that to create a lighting plan and make the scene make sense for what I want it to look like? So we'll talk about all of that on Friday. Thank you for your attentiveness today. I hope this was informative and helpful. I hope maybe it inspired you a little bit. If you like this kind of stuff, at the end of my lesson on Friday, not only will I be sharing all my slides with you as well as the video recording of this lesson, but I also have like additional videos just about lighting for students who really like this stuff. I got a little playlist of lighting videos. And if you like that stuff on Friday, I can share that with you if this is something that interests you. And every once in a while, it interests a student a lot and they want to pursue this and as like a career. It is something that you can do, that it is a specialized talent, a specialized skill that if you get good at, you can make a decent living doing if you're skilled enough in your craft. That is all for today. I will see you on Friday. Have a wonderful next couple of days. You've been an excellent class, and I look forward to seeing you then. All right. Love you lots.
Bye, everyone.
See you later.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.